Hey everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. Today I'm going to be sharing with you the biggest mistakes I made as a new writer. 13-year-old me who was trying to write her first novel made a lot of mistakes. She tried hard, but she really did make a lot of mistakes, and I thought I would shed some light on them. Now, these aren't mistakes every new writer makes, but I'm sure they're mistakes that are relatively common. So the first one is kind of embarrassing to talk about because I did it up until embarrassingly recently. I think I only broke this habit 3 or 4 years ago. I did this until I was around 18, which is kind of sad, and it's writing direct thoughts in italics. This is when you're writing in third person, anytime a character is thinking something, you put it in italics and it's in first person, and then you say that the character thought, and then you go back to the narrative. But the really embarrassing thing is that I would even do this in first person. In first person, I would italicize some thoughts, even though it's first person, so literally everything is a thought. I don't know what my logic was. I don't know why I would separate some things and think that they deserve to be italicized. It was really, I don't know why. It literally took me until university to learn that you're not supposed to do that. Next up is a mistake that I think a lot of new writers make, and it's having way too many flashbacks. One of my early novels that I wrote when I was around 14, 15, that book must have been 40% flashback. It was all flashback. I just felt like the reader really had to know every single thing about my character's childhood and past, and that it was all so important, and I put them all at the beginning. So for the first half of that novel, it was probably majority flashback and barely anything in the fictive present. It was not a very engaging narrative structure, I can tell you that. But it leads into my third mistake, and it was not knowing where the real story was. I did have some issues, especially with that one book that was all flashback, and the main issue with it was that I thought the important story was in the present, when really the storyline was more so in the past. That's kind of where the interesting story was. The character's backstory was much more interesting than the present. The present was the original concept I'd had, and so it seemed like where the plot line was, but when I actually look at the book, the interesting stuff, with like interesting internal conflict and character development, was everything I was trying to tell you in flashback. My fourth issue was probably my biggest issue, and it was melodrama. I had this idea that good writing meant as emotional as possible, which is not true. And so I would really pile on the feelings. Everything was so melodramatic. The way that I would describe emotions was really, really melodramatic. It would always be, I can't even say this. This is gonna completely ruin my credibility. Keep in mind, I was a young teen, but things like, if a character was sad, saying things like, you know, like, tears overflowed from my soul or whatever. That's not a direct quote, but stuff like that, it was so bad. Any kind of more major plot point where anything kind of dramatic was happening was so over the top dramatic. I basically just thought that emotion meant good writing, and I also thought that the way to elicit emotion from readers was to just have the most strong, powerful, overwhelming emotion in my character. That wasn't really a true philosophy. I was very misguided. The next mistake I made is one that I made throughout a lot of my early novels, and it was a structuring mistake. And what I would do was have a lot of mini arcs with no main arc. So basically, every chapter or couple chapters would be focused on a little problem, and then that problem would be resolved probably in kind of a contrived way, knowing myself, and then we'd just jump into another kind of random problem. And the thing is, none of these little problems were actually contributing to solving the main problem of the novel. You could have shuffled the order, you could have removed half of them, it wouldn't have had any bearing on the plot. It kind of just came from me not knowing how to progress the plot, so I would just create whatever problem I could and then solve it and then move on to the next one. It was very repetitive. Another mistake I made was another thing that I just thought that this was a quality of good writing, so it was something I was doing consciously, was I would end every chapter on a cliffhanger. Every single chapter, I would end the chapter on this really contrived cliffhanger just to keep the reader reading. In my whole first novel, I don't even know how many chapters are in that novel, I think it's around 27 chapters, probably 24 of them end on a cliffhanger, and the The remaining 3 are like a little cliffhangery. They're kind of like trying to be suspenseful, but not really suspenseful. It was a lot of forced suspense. It created a lot of issues other than just the fact that it was exhausting and contrived. One of the problems it created was my next issue, and it was never answering questions. This is often known in storytelling as the Lost effect, if any of you ever saw the show Lost. The show was kind of notorious for opening up a lot of mysteries and a lot of questions, and then never answering them. And the thing is, that's exciting for a bit because there are so many questions, but eventually you kind of lose faith in the storyteller because you're not getting any answers. I had such a problem with this, and it was because of all those cliffhanger endings, you know? Every chapter would end on a cliffhanger, and it wasn't like a thing I planned because I didn't know what I was doing, so I would just kind of throw a random cliffhanger on, and then that was a mystery that I would have to deal with, but I didn't know what the answer was because I didn't plan this out in advance. And so I just had all of these random mystery threads floating around, and I don't think any of them were ever really answered. My last issue was that I used way too many dreams, and I tried to use dreams for symbolism. So here's the thing about dreams. Dreams don't have stakes. You know when people try to tell you about their dream, and as soon as they start telling you about their dream, you kind of zone out because it's like, it wasn't real. I don't care. Dreams don't have any real stakes on the bearing of the plot, unless dreams are somehow a component of the narrative. But, you know, in just a regular narrative where we're just seeing the character have a dream, that dream has no effect on the plot. It's just random hallucinations the character's brain is coming up with while they sleep. And so they're really melodramatic, and they're not a good way to reveal character, but I would try to use them as a way to reveal character, and I would have these, like, cool dream sequences. I mean, they weren't cool. They seemed cool in my mind when I was writing them. And I would try to use them to be symbolic and reveal conflict, internal conflict in the character, but it really didn't do any of those things. It was just exhausting. It was just kind of pointless filler and really melodramatic. And I would do that way too often. I would have so many dream sequences. And I think a big part of it was I would just reach a point where I didn't know what happened next, and so I would just write a dream, which wasn't a great way to deal with my writer's block. So those are the mistakes I made as a new writer. I am really interested to know what the biggest mistakes you made were. Did you make any of the same ones as I did? That might make me feel a little better about myself if I was not the only one who did these things. So thank you guys so much for watching, and remember to subscribe for new writing, editing, and publishing videos every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time.